CAT8
is a group of Jain individuals and professionals
who are assisting the community at large
during the COVID-19 crisis.
CAT8 began just before the COVID-19 crisis,
when it held a can challenge,
where children created iconic monuments
using cans of food. It raised some 3 tons of canned food.
Enough supplies for 4 months.
for the Watford Food Bank,
run by the Trussell Trust.
During the COVID-19 crisis,
CAT8 is helping the elderly, the vulnerable,
Those with isolation and key workers.
with meals and essential shopping.
Help with medicine collection.
And someone to talk to.
whilst coping with isolation.
CAT8 is organising webinars,
imparting information and creating awareness.
A range of topics for all age groups.
In addition, we have created a business and education helpline
For individuals and businesses that need further guidance on the topics of all the webinars.
we also have a YouTube channel,
A Facebook page and a Twitter handle.
CAT8 is a newest network fibre,
Connecting the community.
Slide, please. Thank you. We are very kindly supported by a number of businesses to enable us to carry out our work. Today's speakers, next slide, please. Today's speakers are Sawan Shah and Dr. Suraj Joshi. Sawan has a profound interest in education, helping the younger generation. Born and raised in Kenya, having been to a state and a grammar school in the UK, and after graduating from University of Birmingham, where he studied medicine, he has a tremendous wealth of knowledge and experience to share. His experience of tutoring spans more than 7 years. He is a director, tutor, and educational consultant at his company, Sawan Shah Limited, based in Stanmore. The company provides one-to-one, small group, and online tutoring for various age groups and has clients nationally and internationally. The company specializes in admissions to top independent and grammar schools. Its ethos includes honesty, integrity, reliability, and dedication to service. Sawan also tutors for charity and has teamed up with a number of organizations to make this a reality. He is also an examiner for several examination boards for GCSE and A-level. Dr. Suraj Joshi is a doctor working at Northwick Park Hospital and recently graduated with an MBBS, BSc, a first-class honours in neuroscience from Imperial College in London. He currently owns Secondary Entrance, an 11+ training test company, and has worked for other tutoring companies. So over to you, Sawan. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for your introduction, Rumit. So I hope you can hear me all very well. Can you guys hear me?
Yes. Yes, okay. You're fine at the moment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, so today, thank you so much for spending this time to listen to this webinar, which is going to be very useful because the focus of the topic is on school entrance exams. And as probably a lot of the parents with young kids know, it's very difficult in this country to get into the top schools because there's a lot of competition and there is a lot of things you have to do to prepare yourself in order to get into some of the top schools. So the focus of our presentation by myself and Dr. Suraj Joshi is going to be around the school entrance exams. So we're going to focus on the 7+, but mainly on the 11+, since that's the most common entrance route, and then also look at the 13+ in addition to that. So before I kind of start off my presentation, I just wanted to say that usually when parents come to me and contact me for advice or are looking for some sort of support, they usually are asking about what are the best schools in the area, how can I get my children there, and also they want to know about the league tables, how can they actually get their children into those top schools. And I often say to them that, it's not just actually about the process of getting someone into a school, which itself is obviously difficult, but there's more to it than just getting someone into a school. There is many other factors you have to look into. For example, you have to consider, my number one factor would be, will the child actually be happy in the school that they're going to go to? I think that should be the number one factor, because every school has works a bit differently, and we'll see through the course of this presentation how the choice of school can actually affect the long-term future of actually the child. Secondly, the other thing that's also important is to actually look at what else will the child get out of going to a particular type of school, in terms of not just the extracurricular activities, but also in terms of the kind of social networks they build, and what they will actually gain in terms of the type of education and how they become eventually independent learners. So the focus of the presentation is going to look at, first of all, why would we actually bother with actually these type of entrance exams, or why is it important? And we'll cover the main reasons, kind of why. And also we will look at basically what are the different entry points, how do they differ, and then moving on to looking at the two main different types of exams for grammar schools, and then also looking at independent versus grammar schools in terms of what are some of the factors you can consider when deciding between the two, and then what do you need to succeed in these exams? What are the best preparation methods? What else do you need to do to succeed? And then we will look at other aspects apart from just the exams. What else do you need to do to get into such schools? And then we will look at some of the resources that are available and which ones, how do you decide between them? And then eventually the bigger point is how do you actually eventually create success out of all of this? And some of the points for what are the secrets of success. And then we're going to round it up by some of the things you shouldn't do and some of the things that you should actually do, which are actually a must. So moving on from that, thinking about why you should actually bother with such exams, because obviously the last thing you want to do as a parent is actually put your child through very competitive exams, which can be difficult, and maybe the child is not going to obviously appreciate the level of difficulty with the exams, but also they may actually then end up fostering a negative relationship with the parent if things do not go to plan. However, saying all of that, it is very important to actually get into a good school in order to secure a child's future, to make sure that they have the best possible chances and opportunities that are made available to them. So actually going through all of this trouble is actually very, very important. So, and I think there are methods actually in order to actually foster that, learning, together with actually making it an enjoyable process as well. It doesn't have to be difficult, and it doesn't have to be something that always seems a bit of a bother. You can actually make it interesting and actually make it worthwhile. So it's very important that right from a young age, that if a child can go into a very good school, then they have the best possible chances of success. And I think that the earlier they can get in, the actual better. And we will see why as we go through the presentation. So you're going to try and get better opportunities for the children in terms of long-term future, even moving on to things like improving the chances, like from a university and career perspective later on down the road. It's also very important that the children themselves, they develop competitive spirit right from the off, because if they can do that, then what will actually happen is it doesn't become much of an issue later on in life, when that will ultimately eventually pan out anyway. So it's good to introduce that element of competition, healthy competition. And then it also obviously introduces focus, by practicing different things which are important to the school entrance exams. You're already nurturing some level of focus, which is not available in normal schools, because what they teach in the school program is very different compared to, say the 11 plus or 13 plus syllabus as such, or even the 7 plus. Then many parents may also have, other children. And once you get one child in, say the eldest child in, it may be easier to get the younger children in, the younger siblings, because some schools have sibling-based policies that make it easier for the second or third child to join that school. So it will be important in that way as well. And then one of the things I find a lot is that parents are looking at what is the best possibility, what is the best thing they can do. So some people want to invest in, for example, getting this child into a very good school right from the off, so that basically becomes cost effective in the future. So for example, if you coach your child to say successfully train and pass the grammar school exams, for example, then it may mean that you don't have to pay all the expensive private school fees later down the road, as an example. And also, although it is a very hard exam, we will see the rates of people who generally tend to get in. It is still very doable, and because it's so doable, it's actually better to take action and not just to say that it's not possible. A lot of things are actually possible as long as you put your mind, your focus, and your kind of energy into that. So that's kind of why we should bother with the entrance exams. Now, at this point, I know a lot of people might be thinking that actually, going through all this trouble, not just in terms of from a perspective of putting in all the effort in, but also all the energy, the hard work, and then obviously, the money. For example, you're going to hire a tutoring company or tutoring provider to get your children into the best possible schools, or spend the time yourself, then basically some people will be wondering, is it worth it? And my answer to that will be that actually it's the best investment you'll ever make. Because if there's one guarantee in terms of an investment, it's actually in education. Because whatever you learn at any age is actually going to be cumulative. And therefore, the returns of that are going to be tremendous. And even if the child eventually doesn't succeed in getting into, say, one of those selective schools because of the difficult process, whatever they learned cannot be unlearned. It's going to be an investment and secures the future. So that's about the only guarantee you can get from an investment perspective. That is why everyone needs to learn, everyone keeps learning. Okay, so moving on then. So there are three main kind of entry points to get into schools in the UK. 7 plus or 8 plus, it's similar in terms of that younger level of entrance. Then the most common is obviously the 11 plus, which is the one that probably a lot of you have actually heard about. And then there is the 13 plus, which is more difficult, and I'll explain why later. There is a chance to get into the 16 plus exams as well for some schools, when transitioning from GCSEs moving on to A-levels. But that is not going to be the main focus of our presentation because there's only very few schools that do that, and it's more for the older age group. Okay, so moving on to the 7/8 plus exams. So this is the earliest kind of entry point you can most likely get your children into. And what it focuses on is on basically an entire spectrum of the year 3, what somebody should know by the end of the year 3 syllabus. The children who sit this exam, though, will probably be in year 2. So therefore, they have to be advanced. They have to know material that is not usual for their age, essentially. And the focus of the exams will be around maths, typically, and English. Sometimes they can also ask questions to do with reasoning, which covers verbal and non-verbal reasoning. And if it's to do with English, there is a number of areas that are assessed even at that young age. So things like comprehension, inference, looking at story writing, creative writing, and in some cases they even test phonics, memory, dictation, and punctuation, grammar, spelling, which is kind of usual. But in some cases, you even go further, looking at memory, dictation, and phonics. So it's quite difficult, even at that young age. It's not exactly a walk in the park. It's going to be difficult because obviously good schools want good students and those with potential. Okay, so so I think it's at this point, is this worth saying that, say if you are preparing a child for the 7 or 8 plus, and say if they're not successful in that, that does not actually mean that they cannot sit the 11 plus exams. They can still apply and do the 11 plus exams. So it's another thing they can actually do if they've not been successful in the first chance. The 11 plus exams are pretty much done by every selective school in the country when going from primary school to secondary school, and the focus is on 4 main elements. So there's the maths, the English, the verbal reasoning, and the non-verbal reasoning. It has to be said that the non-verbal reasoning and the verbal reasoning as well are becoming less important, in the sense that there is more focus on the maths and English, and in some cases the verbal and non-verbal reasoning are being tied up into the other 2 areas. But that does not mean that you don't have to practice the verbal and non-verbal reasoning. It just simply means that the sections are arranged differently nowadays compared to before. So the 4 areas still need to be practiced. And this is a slide that probably, or part of the presentation that probably a lot of people are unaware of, and need a lot of explanation behind this. There are 2 main aspects, the 2 main types of exams that your child could actually sit in the 11 plus when you're looking at grammar schools, for example. The first one is the GL exam, which is the GL assessment exam, which is the traditional one, the one that a lot of grammar schools tend to do because they have a bank of exam questions that they've actually used in the past, and they can reuse or modify easily. However, because the exams, quite traditional, and a lot of people have been getting coaching on this and have become familiar with the type of the exam, many boards or many schools have actually come to the conclusion that the GL assessment is probably a little bit outdated, and they want to start introducing the CEM, which is the one prepared by the University of Durham and Center for Evaluation and Monitoring. So basically what it is that this type of exam is different because it doesn't have that familiar feel to it. And so it can be quite surprising for many parents and the children when they see a paper on the CEM. And it's designed to be unfamiliar, to be difficult, essentially completely different to the GL assessment. And the way in which it is different is purely in the sense that one, there's not many questions you can practice in terms of the CEM because there are no past papers for the CEM. It also looks at 3 different aspects. So verbal reasoning, non-verbal, and numerical reasoning, which is the math side essentially. Whereas GL typically looks at those 4 different sections that I mentioned earlier, the traditional kind of format. And because there's so many papers you can actually practice with in GL, you feel comfortable as you do more and more papers that things are going well, or if they're not going well, you can tweak so that they do go well. But with CEM, it's a bit more difficult to actually, know how somebody's performing, even in terms of trends. And I think this is where like coaching and for example, getting help can actually really be important, because really only a professional can really know how that is actually going to pan out really. Then on top of that, there's also some other differences. So for example, the CEM is more linked to the Key Stage 2 curriculum compared to the GL, and also uses a wider range of vocabulary. It's more focused on that. But then the GL obviously has many different varieties of questions in terms of, say, for example, the verbal reasoning, where you can ask as many as 21 different elements. So it is quite complex. But I have to say that there is a growing trend towards the CEM, and therefore probably fast forward a couple more years, and it might be the exact choice for many schools, including grammar schools. Now, one of the things is that you need to know the key dates about the 11 plus exams, because they are different for grammar schools and for private schools. So September is a key date for grammar school entrance examinations for 11 plus. January is the main month really for independent schools. However, the independent schools also tend to run pre-test exams in November roughly, where they will then use those results to then determine whether somebody should be allowed to sit the 11 plus exams in January if they're successful in those pre-test exams. And the exams obviously will be set in year 6. You should start preparing for them 18 months before, roughly, as a guide. It's very important that the exams are prepared for at the right time, so you don't want to leave it too late or start too early. Starting too early can also be a bad thing, because it might cause a child to lose motivation and lose focus. But you have to start at the right time, because leaving it too late will mean that there's less chances of success. So these are the key dates. Now, in terms of chances of getting in to a top school, really, it's going to be difficult to obviously know for certain. However, this is on average, just as an average, 1 in 10 children who sit that exam for 11 plus in the top competitive school are likely to pass that exam. But that doesn't still mean that they're in the school. What it means is that they can then go to the next stage, which is most likely to be an interview. And when it comes around to the interview, it's not just something that's like a walk in the park again. It's not just a chat, for example. They are looking at various things, even if it sounds a bit informal. They will be looking at various things. For example, how the child interacts with others, the type of behavior, the level of logical intelligence they can actually show as well. So there's a lot of things that will be looked at from a kind of observation perspective, and from there only 1 in 2 or possibly 1 in 3 will actually succeed. So the chances really of getting into these are quite low to begin with. But if you've done, for example, if you get the right level of support and you got the right level of preparation going for you, then there's a very good chance you could still get in and benefit from all those rewards of getting into a top school. So again, because of that, it's difficult to know again what score you need to get in. But as an average, 85% really and above is sufficient to generally get into these schools. However, most importantly, that needs to be achieved in all the different areas. So if there was verbal reasoning, maths, non-verbal, and English, you need to try and score that in every single criteria there. And even if one is lacking, for example, there's a good chance you won't get in because they haven't seen a well-balanced candidate. Okay, so then a lot of parents also want to know about, well, what is the main difference between independent and grammar schools in terms of their entrance exams, but also in terms of their, which one should they send a child to, really, if they had, say, the funding. The important thing to say here is that basically it is probably best to, widen the net. It's important to think, okay, well, the exams take place on different dates, first of all, and essentially you can sit both exams. There's nothing to stop you from doing that. So why not just increase the chances of actually getting into one of these top schools by sitting both sets of exams? And that is something I would strongly encourage because they happen at different dates, as we saw, September and January. But one of the things that you have to be aware of is that with independent schools, especially nowadays, a lot of them actually have so-called feeder schools or preparatory schools that will actually, where they actually take a large proportion of their students get first choice in terms of getting in to those schools. So therefore, automatically, if your child is not from that feeder school, they have less chance of actually getting into those schools, and they tend to happen especially for the independent schools. So watch out for that. And just to keep your options open, it's probably best to do both exams. The preparation is similar for both of them, so I cannot see why somebody would not want to do both of them. And I'll explain why. Even if you don't have the funding, it's still worth doing both of them, and I'll explain why later. Okay, so now I'm going to basically pass on this section of the presentation to Suraj, who will actually talk to you about his experience of going to private school and his advice in terms of how you can get into top independent schools. So over to you, Suraj.
Hi everyone, my name's Suraj. Thank you very much, Sawan. So as Sawan mentioned, I myself went to an independent school. I went to Haberdashers Boys School in Elstree. And so my experience of independent schools is primarily from those and from sitting 11 plus myself about 12 or 13 years ago. So a key difference between independent schools is not necessarily at 11 plus, but perhaps at 13 plus, students may have additional subjects apart from maths, English, verbal reasoning and non-verbal reasoning, perhaps like sciences, which they may have to sit. So especially if you're considering applying to independent schools outside of 11 plus, you may need to consider providing for other subjects too. A key difference between independent schools and, for example, the GL and CEM exams is actually that the exam style can vary significantly. So there may not be specific multiple choice questions, but actually instead multi-stage questions, especially near the end of the exam. And some of these can actually be based on foundation GCSE maths questions, for example. Now, it's not to say that your children are necessarily expected to understand GCSE maths, but it's to give an idea of how independent schools look for an application of knowledge than simply regurgitating facts that you may have learned or regurgitating times tables, for example. And really importantly, actually, as in CEM or GL, so if we just go back to the previous slide, if you look at GEM and GL and CEM exams, a lot of them are marked by computers, but most independent school exams are marked by the teachers themselves. And it means that your child has a chance to show off their understanding of mathematics or English, for example, by showing their working. So especially with maths exams, for example, it's really important that your child does show their working, because some of these marks you may get 3 or 4 marks through these questions. And even if they don't get the correct answer, by showing their working and their thought processes, this can really show off to the examiner how well they understand mathematics, for example. So if we just move to the next slide now. So from my own personal experience, the actual idea of sitting the 11 plus, especially for an 11-year-old, can be very, very daunting, especially if you're used to a small school and suddenly you're in a sea of hundreds of students. It's your first real test of a national-based exam. And so preparing your child is very important, letting them know of perhaps the location where they're sitting and how they may have many, many children around them who are all scribbling down answers. It's a very important way of preparing them for unexpected or difficult questions. Another part of this is to identify if your child does get nervous while sitting the exam. So signs such as perhaps not feeling very hungry before the exam or biting their nails can be early signs of anxiety. And it's really important to try and alleviate that before they do the exam itself. And again, this falls down to preparation before the exam. If they are prepared for unexpected questions or difficult questions and know how to deal with that, perhaps with a step-to-step method of using perhaps addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, they may be able to work through difficult problems, which is really what the independent exams are assessing. Another factor which sometimes parents forget is to understand your child's strengths as well as their weaknesses. So every child does have weaknesses, but it's also important to celebrate their strengths. And especially in independent school exams, they are looking for students with a flair for a subject. So whilst they are required to have a baseline understanding of maths and English, a very, very good mathematician can show off with their exams, especially near the end of those questions. Another tip for parents is to try and foster a love for learning as opposed to simply trying to teach your child. So that sits outside of simply doing test papers, but perhaps going to museums and showing them how they can apply their understanding of maths and English to the outer world, or even perhaps when they're going shopping to be able to work out discounts and give that to you, to give them more of a real-world understanding of why they are learning the topics they are. It's important for a parent to be able to set an example to their children. So if a child is asked to do a test paper, it's not as helpful if the rest of the family are watching TV and a child is alone working in a room for an hour. And perhaps it might be more effective for everyone to work together for an hour on different things, to set an example to the child of when it's time to work and when it's time to relax. But ultimately, just to alleviate any anxiety by reminding a child that there are other opportunities for success, and the 11 plus is not the be-all and end-all. And they have other chances, perhaps at 11 plus, at 13 plus, 16 plus, but also at university applications to succeed in whatever field they want to go for. So we just move to the next slide, please. So as I mentioned previously, sometimes it's very difficult to get into the mind of an 11-year-old. And from my memory of sitting the exam itself, there can be a lot of nerves, and especially for some of the grammar schools that I sat, such as QE Boys. There is a lot of students applying for this exam. And sometimes as a child, you've never really seen these many people ever before. And so reminding children that this is just an exam and that they, not to put significant pressure on them is really, really important. When I actually went to the open days for all these schools, what the child cares about is very different to what a parent cares about. For example, my parents were very keen on the academic prowess of the school, but I actually was more interested in the catering and how they were able to give me a credit card or a scan card to be able to buy food. And that's really what I was more interested in when I was going to school. It wasn't really, I had no understanding of how important going to a good school was for the rest of my career. So being able to relate to that is very, very important. And actually, when I went to my interview itself, they did really try to alleviate any anxiety and try to have more of a conversation with you. And having been on the other side, you now realize that the interview is simply a way of gauging the child as a person rather than just a result on a paper. So they are now considered academically good enough to get to the school. And the interview is just to see if that child matches what is on the paper. So they may ask you questions which may be for general knowledge, for example, about news topics. And something like that is very, very important. When you actually look at the school which you want to go to, it's very important to consider the school as one part and education as one part of the school, but actually the people that your child is surrounded by is equally as important, as they will shape their personality, but also their future career and aspirations. A child who is surrounded by people who are equally as hardworking is more encouraged to want to aspire to achieve higher grades and apply for very competitive professions. The way the child speaks is also influenced by the teachers around them. And for example, practicing public speaking and presentations is very important for future careers. As this is also equally important for the behavior that children pick up from those around you. And finally, the breadth of extracurricular activities which may be offered at the school. If a child has a specific interest in playing sports, such as rugby, what are the facilities to be able to support that? Or for example, if there are other activities such as sailing, canoeing, football, whatever your child is interested in, try to focus on applications that also include those two. Thank you. I think I'm going to hand over to Sawan now to carry on.
Sorry, thank you so much, Suraj, for that. That was very useful. So moving away now from the 11 plus aspect in terms of entrance, if we can look at the 13 plus now, which is basically done in year 8 essentially. So it's later on than the 11 pluses. This type of entrance exam is probably the most difficult one in terms of the three of them, the 7 plus, 11 plus, and 13 plus. There is a number of reasons why this is basically more difficult One is that there's fewer schools that actually do the 13 plus compared to the 11 plus entrance. So your chances are automatically diminished by that. The second thing is that you will be tested on more subjects, not just the maths and English. There will also be other aspects such as the history, geography, French, science, religious studies. It all depends on, like the school that you're applying to, which ones they see fit, but there will definitely be more subjects to focus on. Many schools do actually use the common entrance exam when doing the 13 plus exams, because these are set by the ISEB, which is the Independent Schools Examination Board. So that offers a degree of standardization across, say, different independent school sectors. So many schools sign up to that and follow that common entrance syllabus and common entrance exam as a way of getting in through the 13 plus route. But those that do not do that and still offer this level of entrance will end up setting their own papers. But again, they will be very similar to the common entrance exams. These exams again will be done in January in year 8. But again, you will have some sort of pre-tests in November. Some may even be done in November, depending on the situation. And usually there will be a pre-test in year 6, just to make sure that the child is performing well. There's some degree of consistency. And if they're doing well, then they could be put forward to do these 13 plus exams later in year 8. So you have to show a degree of consistency. Now, I just want to say that because of the current situation with regards to the coronavirus and so on, a lot of these exams are still likely to happen in January for the independent school sectors. But those, for example, in September may be pushed back. They will happen, but they will be pushed back. Probably November might be a likely option. And I think, as an example, the Buckinghamshire kind of consortium is kind of looking into that. Just as an update. Okay, so then moving on then to the next slide. So there's also other aspects to consider apart from just basically the exam itself. So the exam is only one part of the element, and then there's other aspects to consider. So for example, you also have to consider if your child gets through the exams, they will then have to do the interview or go for an assessment day. Now, this can vary a lot actually between schools. So usually they will be looking at the level of interaction between the child and other children, or between the child and adults, say, for example. And they tend to ask them some, questions, like, for example, one of the questions might be, what is a philosopher, or what does a philosopher do? Or it could be things that are related to, say, current affairs, or things that are just to do with general interaction. What they look at, though, is the ability of the child to use kind of diplomacy in order to build a structure, how they interact. They should be obviously very methodical, but also at the same time, they should have all the key kind of elements, like, say, for example, they should have the ability to listen. Good listening skills can go a long way, but also the behavior should be also very important as well, in terms of making sure that they're respectful. And sometimes, in some occasions, they also end up looking at the parents as well, in terms of asking the parents, about the children. What do they do on a typical day? Because that will give the school some background in terms of, is this child different? Are there something special? And again, it's not worth lying about it, because obviously that could land the parents or the children into some trouble if that's something they cannot discuss fully. So I think that really the importance here is to try and see what the child is like, both say in an academic setting, outside of an academic setting, in order to reach some judgment in terms of whether the school is interested in that student. Then, as I mentioned, it's not the funding that should be a big issue in terms of whether a child can and say cannot succeed, because even with many independent schools, they do offer bursaries and scholarships. which are very important because scholarships are offered for many things. For example, if a child is very good at, say, music, for example, there are some schools that offer music scholarships, others that do academic scholarships if they perform very well in the exam, others that do sports scholarships. So there are many different types of scholarships, which can actually significantly reduce the cost of going to some of these schools, which for independent schools can be quite expensive, and therefore may help to kind of remove that barrier as it was. It's also important to know that some areas, they don't like just do exams per school. Example of this is like Hertfordshire. So there's some areas that do a joint exam, and depending on how you perform in that exam, in that setting, say for the 11th, they will then narrate the results of that exam to all these schools in that area. And then depending on your preference in terms of your ranking of schools, they will then decide if your child is, successful in terms of passing that exam to go to one of those schools, and then which one do they get the preference to go to, depending on the result. It is also very important to know that it is very unlikely that a given school will actually do all of these entrance exams at all of these stages. That is unlikely because it is expensive to do these exams, to hold these sessions. It's also very difficult to arrange from an administrative perspective. So usually they will just have, say, 1 or 2 different points of entry. And so it's important to know which one you want your child to do well in, and where you are interested in as a parent, which ones are you interested in. And obviously you have to do that based on the type of school that you're interested in sending your child to. Then comes catchment area, because catchment area is very important. Some schools that are selective will also look at whether you live in a locality, whether you fit in the catchment area. And if you do, then you can actually, if you pass their exams, you can go to those schools. But if you're not in the catchment area, then even if you do well in the exams, you will not actually be given a chance to go to that school. So it's worth looking at those schools that, if they're looking at the catchment area, that you know what that catchment area is before even applying, really. And even if a school does not have a catchment area, for example, like QE Boys or Henrietta Barnett, they don't have any catchment areas. But you also have to consider the practical side of things. So say if you're living very far away, even if your child succeeds in those exams, will it be logical for them to travel such a huge distance? Unless obviously you're planning on moving, then that's obviously a different issue. And then, as I said, the number one most important factor for any parent actually to decide when sending their children to a particular school is whether the child will be happy in that school. Because from my experience, there have been cases where, for example, a child has got into a very good school. However, when they're faced with that level of competition and that level of pressure inside those schools, they might not foster that same degree of happiness, and they will behave differently and might even get completely upset. So they have to be happy in the environment in which they're operating. And obviously some children will thrive on this level of pressure or the level of competition, but you have to be careful because obviously only the parents know their children the best. And it's important to look at if your child is the type of person who's very, say, sporty, or they have profound interest in, say, extracurricular activities such as drama and so on, then you want to put them into a school that also has that same degree of thought process. And then it's important to consider whether your child will be definitely better off at an independent school, because obviously you're paying fees for an independent school. However, that doesn't mean that they will be the best choice for your child. For example, if you go to an independent school, you're likely to be paying about £6,000 a term. However, basically what it is that if your child is going to be, they have a particular focus in certain areas, like say mathematics or science, say they're more inclined to those areas, and if you end up sending them to, say, a grammar school, a good selective school, then you can always back up their interest with coaching, for example, on the side of that, and that will still be much cheaper. So that's also worth looking at. Now, in terms of resources, a lot of people ask, what are the best resources that we can use to prepare for these, exams, these entrance exams? Now, because there's so many of them, if you go to the bookshop or on Amazon or wherever you get your books from, essentially you'll see that there's so many books out there, and it's very difficult to pinpoint which one is the right material for your child. Many parents just end up choosing anything and just doing that because they think that, okay, there is some material better than nothing. But actually, I think that's the wrong way of looking at it, because actually it's important to select the right material, and you want to select the right material because you want to focus on the weaknesses of the child, and also you want to ensure that they have the best chance of getting into the type of school that they're applying for. So some resources will be better for independent school sectors, for example, but some will be better for grammar schools, and some will be better for CEM, whereas others will be better for GL. So I think it's difficult to know exactly, which material is going to be the right one for your child for a specific school. But I think if you're not sure, it's probably best to get professional advice. And in line with, not trying to do too much, essentially, not trying to overcook something, then it's important to get the right materials first and foremost. Okay, and as I promised that we will be looking at, despite looking at all these exams in terms of when they take place and what you require, for example, in order to do well, there are other aspects of success that are very important that need to be really taken seriously. So, for example, motivation. Now, I often find that there are many times where parents are actually more motivated to actually getting into a school, for example, than the child per se. And actually, I think that the child can equally be motivated as long as they know what they're doing and why they're doing it. So I think having that level of communication with a child can actually really inspire a good thought process, and they may actually take greater degree of interest when they know what they're doing, essentially, rather than just doing it, essentially. So, for example, if somebody comes to me, for example, for 11 plus for school entrance coaching, I always make sure that they understand why they're doing what they're doing, because it is very important that the energy, the motivation, and the interest comes from the student as well. It's a team effort. Everyone has to work together and be pulling in the same direction in order for this to be a success. So that means the parents, the child, most importantly, and obviously anyone else helping them have to pull in the right direction. Then it is also important to look at self-confidence. So what I mean by that is there are many children at this stage who basically are shy. They are, for example, not very forthcoming, and they don't display a good self-esteem. So I think self-confidence is very important, and that will ultimately show in things like the interview. But there's obviously a fine line between self-confidence and just being arrogant. So it's important to have a sense of like, yes, I'm confident that I can get into a good school, and that can actually be nurtured, because a child can actually know when they're doing well in exams, for example, like mock exams, then they could actually have a degree of self-confidence that they can do well, actually. And this is important to foster as well from the parents' perspective and anyone else helping the child. It is important to also establish the right study habits. So what I mean by that is a lot of parents and a lot of children, they study for long hours, but they don't actually realize what exactly they're studying, or they've not got a structure in place. Now, there's some important techniques, basically, that actually will help establish the right study habits. So, for example, developing, for example, a structure like, say, working for 25 minutes flat out, putting all your energy, concentration into it, then a short break, then doing another 25 minutes is very effective. And it's important to develop the right study habits right from an early age so that the chances of success are definitely improved. And then, as I say, everyone has to be working towards a mutual goal in order for this to work. If everyone is pulling in a different direction, then it will never work. So say, for example, if the parent and say a coach or tutor is trying to get a child into a good school, but the child is not interested, then that needs to be sorted out first, that level of aspiration, before anything can work. And the important thing is to obviously have that degree of drive in order for this to be a success. And whilst you have to work hard, obviously, it's also important to work smart. So that means focusing on your weaknesses, improving those to the point where they're just strengths afterwards. And even when you have your strengths, it's important not to just leave them to one side, but you keep training and keep making them even better. So I think that's what would constitute success. And basically, in terms of the final points in terms of what you can actually do. So obviously, it's important to prepare, and preparation has to start from an early perspective. Don't leave it to the last minute. I think 18 months before a school entrance exam is a reasonable time to start off, and that gives plenty of opportunity to iron out any issues. Practice, so practice papers, practice the right books that I mentioned. You select the right material and practice that in order to have the best chance of success. Look out for like the schools that are going to fit in with your child's level of personality, their what they will be interested in, not just academics, but anything else they're interested in from an extracurricular perspective. For example, do research the schools very carefully, what they require, what other students who are already in that school have to say about that school. That's actually very important as well. And you might even want to pay a visit to some of these schools just to see for yourself. Then if you're not sure, you can always seek professional advice in order to, it's better to get that rather than just, for example, taking chances or leaving everything to the last minute. I think it's quite important and is, as I said, a good investment. Then you should also ensure that the child remains focused. They don't get distracted by too many things that are going on around them. So Suraj, I think, mentioned that if, for example, the rest of the family is watching TV whilst the child is trying to prepare for an exam, I think that would not be generally a good way of working, for example. And I think, again, one has to be clear. Everyone has to be clear of the end objective in order for it to be a success. And one of the things I have to mention is that not obviously everyone who sits these exams are going to get in. That's why they're highly selective and it's very competitive to get in. So it's very important to have a plan B and even a plan C in place. But I mean, just to say that it doesn't mean that just because you don't get into one of these top schools that you're not going to do well later in life. It means that you could just basically be a late developer and actually still succeed later in the future. So it doesn't mean that all the hope is lost. It just means it might come later. But the things not to do are obviously, for example, I find people that they just basically follow everyone else. So for example, if say a friend or somebody, a relative or somebody like that is actually preparing their children for a particular exam, everyone kind of follows suit. But obviously not all children are the same. So in the same way, they may not all be suited for the same schools. So it's important to do your own research and have your own structure and plan in place. Obviously, don't over-prepare, because if you do, then basically the child will just have a mental breakdown, essentially. It's important to mix up everything as well. I've already mentioned not to start too late or too early. Too early is not good because, again, the child will lose confidence and probably become bored of the exams later on. And starting too late is, not enough preparation there. So it's not a good idea. Don't put too much pressure, obviously, on the child because they're already under a lot of pressure anyway. So it's important just to foster a good relationship and, have that right level of expertise in terms of making sure you can extract as much from them in the best possible way without, letting them get disappointed. And also, it's very important that they don't put all your eggs in one basket. So don't just think that your child is going to get into one school, because even if you feel that they're very good, you can't take such chances because you don't know how good other children are, especially when it comes to exams. And it's important not to think about doing every single past paper, every single book out there, because one, it's not feasible, and two, you have to be selective. Each book is designed for a given purpose, so you have to, select the right material for your child. The other thing is that a lot of parents actually believe that why should I bother with all of this when they feel that the child is not good enough, not compared to other children. But I think that that doesn't mean that they should not set such exams, because they could still be a success. They could still pass these exams. For example, if they receive the right level of support, the right level of coaching. I've seen people turn it around when previously it was thought that they would definitely not get in. Anything is possible, just as long as the focus is there. And obviously, it's quite easy to compare children, one to another. And we're working around all of those things, building their strengths, making their weaknesses into strengths can be very, very useful. But I think that comparing people is not a good idea, because that could, for example, cause self-motivation to be lost, as an example. So finally, these are my contact details and Suraj's contact details there. If you need any help going forward, then obviously feel free to contact us, and we will try our best to obviously help you wherever possible. So thank you so much, and I think now we'll shortly move on to the question and answer section.